Afghan mountainside as Petty Officer First Class, Marcus Doc Rivera adjusted his medical kit one final time. For 18 months, he had served as the primary combat medic for SEAL Team 7's Charlie Platoon, earning a reputation that bordered on legendary. His hands had pulled 17 wounded warriors back from death's doorstep, stitching together torn flesh and shattered bones under enemy fire with the precision of a surgeon and the speed of desperation. The radio crackled to life. In his earpiece, "Overwatch! This is Ghost Leader. We have movement in the valley below. Multiple hostiles, armed and dangerous. Doc, you're our eyes up there." Marcus pressed his eye to the scope of his SR-25 sniper rifle, a weapon he'd trained with but rarely used in combat. His primary role had always been saving lives, not taking them. The weight of the rifle felt foreign compared to his medical bag, yet somehow familiar, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Through the high-powered optics, he could see a group of Taliban fighters moving through the rocky terrain, their weapons glinting in the harsh Afghan sun. "I count 12 hostiles," Marcus whispered into his throat mic, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "They're moving toward the village. Looks like they're carrying IEDs." The village below was home to nearly 300 civilians, including the small medical clinic where Marcus had spent countless hours treating wounded children and elderly villagers. The thought of those innocent faces, little Fatima with her bright smile despite her war-torn surroundings, old Ahmad who always insisted on sharing his tea, made something cold and hard settle in Marcus's chest. "Doc, we need you to take—" "The shot!" came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Hayes, his platoon leader. "You have the best angle. We can't let them reach the village." Marcus's finger found the trigger, his breathing automatically falling into the rhythm he'd practiced 1,000 times on the range, but never in anger. In his scope, he could see the lead fighter clearly. A man, no older than himself, with calloused hands wrapped around an AK-47. For a split second, Marcus saw not an enemy, but another human being. Perhaps someone who had once dreamed of a different life, maybe even someone who had family waiting for him. But then he remembered the children in the village, the mothers who would clutch there. Babies closer tonight if these men succeeded in their mission. His medical oath to, first, do no harm, warred with his duty as a SEAL to protect the innocent. In that crystalline moment of decision, Marcus realized that sometimes the greatest act of healing was preventing the wound from being inflicted in the first place. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with a sound that seemed to echo across eternity. Through his scope, he watched the lead fighter crumple to the ground, his weapon clattering uselessly among the rocks. The other fighters scattered, seeking cover, but Marcus was already acquiring his next target. His movements were fluid, mechanical, as if some dormant part of his training had suddenly awakened with lethal precision. "Target down," he reported, his voice betraying none of the emotional storm raging within him. 11 remaining hostiles seeking cover behind the rock formation. What happened next would haunt him for years to come. As Marcus continued to engage the enemy fighters, something extraordinary and terrifying began to unfold. Each shot found its mark with an accuracy that defied explanation. His hands, so accustomed to healing, seemed to have found a different kind of precision, one that ended lives rather than saving them. The silence on the radio was deafening. Even his seasoned teammates, men who had witnessed countless acts of courage and skill, found themselves speechless as they watched their gentle medic transform into something they had never seen before. Marcus wasn't just shooting accurately. He was shooting with an almost supernatural precision that suggested years of dedicated sniper training, not the limited marksmanship courses of a combat medic. By the time the engagement ended, 11 targets lay motionless in the valley below. 11 shots, 11 kills. No wounded, no survivors to potentially harm civilians later. The mathematics of death had been calculated with the same meticulous care Marcus once applied to dosages of morphine and battlefield tourniquets. "Jesus Christ, Doc! whispered Petty Officer Rodriguez over the radio, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear. "Where the hell did that come from?" Marcus slowly pulled his eye away from the scope, his hands beginning to shake as the adrenaline started to fade. The rifle that had felt so natural moments before now seemed like a foreign object, tainted with a purpose that contradicted everything he thought he knew about himself. He had saved the village, protected innocent lives, and fulfilled his duty as a SEAL. So why did he feel as though he had lost something essential about himself in the process? The haunting realization began to creep into his consciousness like a slow poison. The precision, the calm, the deadly efficiency. These weren't skills he had suddenly discovered. They were skills he had always possessed, buried beneath layers of medical training and humanitarian instincts, waiting for the right moment to surface. The question that would plague him in the sleepless nights to come was not where these abilities had originated, but why he had been so naturally gifted at taking life when his entire career had been dedicated to preserving it. As he packed up his rifle and prepared to rejoin his team, Marcus caught his reflection in the weapon's scope. The face staring back at him looked the same, but the eyes were different. Older, harder, marked by a knowledge that couldn't be unlearned. He had crossed a line that morning, not just from medic to sniper, but from one version of himself to another entirely. And in the oppressive silence that followed his radio transmission, he realized that his teammates had witnessed that transformation too, leaving them all to grapple with the unsettling question of who Marcus Rivera really was beneath the surface. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman felt suffocating despite its concrete walls and industrial ventilation. Marcus sat at the metal table, his hands folded carefully in front of him, studying the grain of the wood as if it held the answers to questions he wasn't ready to ask. Across from him, Lieutenant Commander Hayes paced back and forth, his boots creating a rhythmic pattern on the polished floor that seemed to match the hammering of Marcus's heart. 11 confirmed kills, Doc. 11. Hayes stopped pacing and fixed his piercing blue eyes on Marcus. In my 15 years as a SEAL, I've never seen shooting like that. Hell, I've worked with Marine Scout snipers who couldn't pull off what you did this morning. The other members of Charlie Platoon sat in uncomfortable silence around the room. Rodriguez kept glancing at Marcus like he was seeing a ghost. Thompson, their team's actual designated marksman, hadn't spoken a word since they'd returned to base, his jaw clenched tight with what Marcus recognized as professional jealousy mixed with genuine bewilderment. "Sir, I just did what needed to be done," Marcus replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt hollow, inadequate to explain the seismic shift that had occurred within him during those crucial minutes on the mountainside. Hayes slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Bullshit, Rivera! You don't just do what needs to be done and accidentally become Carlos Hathcock reincarnated. That kind of precision takes years of specialized training, thousands of rounds downrange, and a level of mental conditioning that most people never achieve." The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Marcus could feel the weight of 7 pairs of eyes studying him, searching for cracks in whatever facade they thought he was maintaining. The truth was, he had no facade. The confusion and terror they saw on his face was genuine. He was just as bewildered by his performance as they were. It was Chief Petty Officer Williams who finally broke the tension. Williams was a 20-year veteran, a man who had seen action in every major conflict since the Gulf War, and his opinion carried more weight than anyone else's in the room. "Doc," Williams said slowly, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "I need you to think real hard about your background. Real hard. Because what we witnessed today doesn't happen by accident. That kind of shooting is muscle memory. Ingrained instinct. It's not something you learn from a manual." Marcus looked up, meeting Williams's steady gaze. "Chief, I swear to you, I've never had advanced sniper training. My background is clean, Grew up in El Paso, joined the Navy straight out of high school, went through corpsman training, then SEAL training, then advanced medical courses. That's it. But even as he spoke the words, fragments of memories began to surface like bubbles rising from the depths of a dark pond. Images that didn't quite fit the narrative he'd constructed about his own life. A man with calloused hands teaching him to breathe, to focus, to become one with the weapon. The smell of gunpowder and creosote bushes, the sound of wind through desert canyons. What about before you joined the Navy? Hayes pressed, sensing something in Marcus's expression. What about your childhood? Marcus's hands began to tremble, slightly. My father died when I was 8. Car accident. After that, it was just me and my mother until I turned 18. And summers? Weekends? Did you visit relatives? William's questions came rapid fire now, the interrogation skills. He'd learned in SEER training evident in his approach. Marcus paused, his brow furrowing as he tried to grasp memories that seemed to slip away like smoke whenever he focused on them. My mother's brother, Uncle Eduardo, he lived out in the desert, had a ranch. I used to spend summers there. Room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of pieces clicking into place. Marcus closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, standing in the New Mexico desert with his uncle's weathered hands guiding his small fingers around an old Winchester rifle. Breathe, mijo. The rifle is not a weapon, it is an extension of your will. Feel the wind, know your target, become the bullet's path. The memories came flooding back now, no longer suppressed by whatever psychological barriers he had constructed over the years. Uncle Eduardo hadn't been just any rancher. He had been Eduardo El Fantasma Morales, a legendary Marine sniper from Vietnam whose unofficial kill count was whispered about in military circles but never officially acknowledged. For 10 summers, from age 8 to 18, Marcus had been trained by one of the most lethal marksmen in American military history. "Oh, God," Marcus whispered, his face going pale. "I remember now." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. His uncle had made him promise never to speak of their training sessions, claiming it was their special secret, something to keep Marcus safe in a world that was growing increasingly dangerous. But Eduardo had been preparing him for something, training him with a methodical precision that suggested he knew Marcus would one day need these skills. "Remember what, Doc?" Hayes's voice seemed to come from very far away. "My uncle. He was a sniper in Vietnam. He trained me every summer for 10 years. But he made me promise never to tell anyone. Said it was to keep me safe. That some kinds of knowledge were dangerous to possess." Marcus looked up at his teammates, seeing the understanding dawn in their eyes. "I think I blocked it out. After he died during my first year in the Navy, I somehow convinced myself it had never happened." Thompson finally found his voice. "Jesus Christ, Doc! You're telling us you've been sitting on a decade of training from a Vietnam War legend and just forgot about it?" "Not forgot," Marcus said slowly, the full scope of his situation beginning to dawn on him. "Suppressed. Buried. When I chose to become a medic, I think I psychologically compartmentalized those skills because they didn't fit with who I wanted to be." Williams leaned forward, his expression grave. "Son, do you have any idea what this means?" "What your uncle's real name was?" Marcus shook his head, but he could see from the look in Williams's eyes that the chief knew something he didn't. Eduardo Morales wasn't just any sniper, Doc. He was part of a classified program. Black Ops, the kind of operations that don't exist. On paper. Williams paused, choosing his words carefully. "If he trained you, if he saw something in you worth developing, then there are people out there who are going to be very interested in what happened today." The weight of Williams's words settled over the room like a shroud. Marcus realized that his moment of instinctive heroism had done more than save a village. It had revealed a secret that some people might have killed to keep buried. His uncle's training, his natural aptitude, his psychological suppression of those skills. It all painted a picture of something larger and more dangerous than a simple case of hidden talent. "What kind of people?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Hayes and Williams exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the world of shadows and secrets that existed beyond Marcus's previous understanding. "The kind of people who don't ask politely when they want something, Doc," Hayes said grimly, "and I have a feeling they're going to want you." 3 days later, Marcus found himself staring at a manila folder that had appeared on his bunk without explanation. No official stamps, no chain of custody documentation, just a simple folder with his name typed on a white label. Inside, photographs and documents that made his blood run cold. The first photograph showed his uncle Eduardo, but not the weathered rancher Marcus remembered. This was a younger man in military fatigues, his face painted with camouflage, crouched behind a rifle, in what appeared to be dense jungle terrain. The timestamp in the corner read, "Classified, Phoenix Program, 1968. Marcus's hands trembled as he recognized the same intense focus in his uncle's eyes that he'd seen in his own reflection just days before. The documents that followed painted a picture of a program that officially never existed. Operation Ghostwalker, a joint CIA and Special Forces initiative that had recruited and trained snipers for missions so sensitive that even their existence was compartmentalized. Eduardo hadn't just been a Marine sniper. He'd been part of an elite unit tasked with eliminating high-value targets across Southeast Asia, often operating alone behind enemy lines for months at a time. But it was the final document that made Marcus's world tilt on its axis, a psychological evaluation dated just 3 months before Eduardo's death, written by someone identified only as Dr. K. The report detailed Eduardo's concerns about genetic predisposition to enhanced spatial reasoning and stress compartmentalization, and his belief that the subject's nephew demonstrates similar neurological markers that could indicate inherited capabilities. Fascinating reading material, isn't it? Marcus spun around to find a woman standing in the doorway of the barracks. She was perhaps 45, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his reaction. She wore civilian clothes, a simple black suit that could have belonged to any government bureaucrat, but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, instinctively reaching for the sidearm that wasn't there. He was off duty, in quarters, supposedly safe. "Dr. Catherine Kellerman," she replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded ominously final. "Though you might know me better as Dr. K. I wrote that psychological evaluation you just read." Marcus felt the walls of the small barracks room closing in around him. "You knew my uncle." "I did more than know him, Marcus. May I call you Marcus?" She didn't wait for permission. "Eduardo was my most successful subject in the Ghostwalker program. 47 confirmed kills across 3 years of operations, 0 mission failures, and most importantly, 0 psychological breaks. He was what we called a natural, someone whose neurological wiring was perfectly suited for the work." Dr. Kellerman moved to the small window, gazing out at the Afghan landscape with the casual interest of a tourist. "Your uncle was also obsessed with the idea that his abilities were hereditary. He spent considerable time researching genetic markers for enhanced spatial processing, stress resilience, and what he called killing instinct. When his sister's son began showing similar traits, he started training me," Marcus finished, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "Not just training, testing, evaluating, documenting." She turned back to him, her expression clinical. "Every summer, Eduardo filed reports about your progress, your natural accuracy, Your ability to remain calm under stress, your tendency to compartmentalize traumatic experiences. By the time you were 16, you were consistently outperforming active-duty snipers in simulated scenarios. Marcus sank onto his bunk, the folder sliding from his nerveless fingers. The memory suppression. That wasn't natural, was it? Dr. Kellerman's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Eduardo was many things, but he wasn't cruel. He knew that if you fully remembered your training, you'd never be able to live a normal life. The skills we taught you, the things you're capable of, they change a person at a fundamental level. So he used a combination of psychological conditioning and mild pharmaceutical intervention to help you forget. Pharmaceutical intervention? The words came out as barely a whisper. Nothing harmful. A mild amnesiac compound administered during your final summer sessions. The idea was to bury the conscious memories while leaving the muscle memory and instincts intact. Think of it as psychological time-release capsules. The skills would surface if and when you truly needed them. The room seemed to spin as Marcus processed this information. His entire adult life, his choice to become a medic, his dedication to healing. Had any of it been real or just elaborate psychological programming? "What do you want from me?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Dr. Kellerman reached into her briefcase and withdrew another folder. This one, thicker and marked with red security stamps. "There's a situation, Marcus. A terrorist cell operating in the tribal regions has acquired something that poses a significant threat to national security. Traditional military operations have failed. Special forces infiltration has been compromised. What we need is someone who can operate completely alone, someone with the skills to eliminate multiple high-value targets across a wide area without support or backup." She set the folder on the bunk beside him. "Someone exactly like you." Marcus stared at the folder without opening it. "And if I refuse?" "Then you return to your unit, continue your service as a medic, and try to forget this conversation ever happened." Her tone suggested this was a perfectly reasonable option, but her eyes told a different story. "Of course, your recent performance has already drawn considerable attention. There are other organizations, other governments who would be very interested in acquiring someone with your unique combination of skills and psychological profile." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Refused to work for his own government, and he might find himself a target for others who were far less scrupulous about how they recruited talent. "How long do I have to decide?" "You have until tomorrow at 800 hours. At that time, you'll either board a transport to a classified location for mission briefing, or you'll return to regular duties with Team 7. Dr. Kellerman picked up her briefcase and moved toward the door. "Choose wisely, Marcus. Your uncle believed you were destined for something greater than tending wounds on the battlefield. Perhaps it's time to find out if he was right." After she left, Marcus sat alone with the two folders spread before him like competing futures. In one, he could see himself continuing as Doc Rivera, the healer, the man who saved lives and slept peacefully at night. In the other, he glimpsed a shadow figure moving through hostile territory, dispensing death with surgical precision to protect innocents he would never meet. As the Afghan sun set beyond his window, casting long shadows across the barracks floor, Marcus realized that the choice had already been made the moment he'd pulled that trigger 3 days ago. The question wasn't whether he would accept Dr. Kellerman's offer. It was whether he had the courage to finally become the weapon his uncle had forged him to be, and whether his soul could survive the transformation. At 0755 hours the next morning, Marcus stood at the crossroads of his existence, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder and two folders tucked securely in his jacket. The transport helicopter's rotors were already spinning, creating a whirlwind of dust and debris that seemed to mirror the chaos in his mind. Dr. Kellerman waited beside the aircraft, her expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. But it wasn't her presence that had shattered Marcus's world in the final hours before. His decision, It was the discovery he'd made at 0300 hours, when sleep had proven impossible, and he'd found himself drawn back to the classified folder like a moth to flame. Hidden beneath the operational documents had been a single photograph that changed everything. His mother, Maria Rivera, standing beside Eduardo in military fatigues, both of them younger, both carrying sniper rifles. The timestamp read, Phoenix Program, 1967. On the back, someone had written in his uncle's familiar handwriting, Training begins with the next generation. Maria concurs, the bloodline must continue. His mother hadn't been the grieving widow, she'd pretended to be. She had been Eduardo's partner, his equal, perhaps even his superior. Every summer when she'd sent Marcus away to visit Uncle Eduardo, she hadn't been seeking respite from single motherhood. She had been continuing a program of genetic and psychological engineering that had been in motion since before his birth. The morning's revelations had come in rapid succession, each one more devastating than the last. A phone call to his mother at 0400 hours had ended with her finally dropping the facade that had defined his entire life. We tried to give you a choice, mijo, she had said, her voice carrying none of the weakness he remembered. But some destinies cannot be escaped. Your father, he wasn't killed in a car accident. He discovered what Eduardo and I were planning for you. He threatened to expose the program. The silence that followed had stretched across continents and decades of lies. Did you kill him? Marcus had whispered into the phone. Eduardo did. Clean, quick, painless. Your father was a good man, but he couldn't understand that we were preparing you for something greater than an ordinary life. The world needs people like us, Marcus. People willing to make the hard choices, to carry the burdens others cannot bear. Now, standing beside the helicopter with the weight of absolute betrayal crushing down on him, Marcus understood that every relationship in his life had been a carefully orchestrated deception. His mother, his uncle, even his choice to become a medic. All of it designed to create the perfect weapon while maintaining the psychological stability necessary for extended operations. Dr. Kellerman approached him, her heels clicking against the concrete despite the chaos of the helicopter's downdraft. Having second thoughts? I spoke with my mother this morning, Marcus said, his voice barely audible over the mechanical noise. Something flickered across Dr. Kellerman's face, surprise perhaps, or concern. I see. And what did Maria tell you? Everything. Marcus turned to face her fully, and she stepped back slightly at what she saw in his eyes. About my father. About the program. About the fact that my entire existence has been a carefully constructed lie designed to create the perfect killer. Dr. Kellerman removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that held no apology, no sympathy, only cold calculation. Your uncle believed that emotional attachments made operatives unreliable. He was wrong. Controlled emotional investment, properly channeled, creates motivation that cannot be replicated through training alone. Controlled emotional investment? Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Is that what you call lying to someone about everything they've ever believed about themselves? I call it necessary preparation for a world that most people cannot comprehend. Dr. Kellerman gestured toward the helicopter. Marcus, in the past 72 hours, you've learned that your genetic makeup, psychological conditioning, and skill set make you quite possibly the most effective long-range elimination specialist ever developed. You can either embrace that reality and use it to serve your country, or you can spend the rest of your life knowing that hundreds of innocent people died because you chose emotional comfort over duty. The manipulation was masterful, and Marcus recognized it for what it was. Another layer of psychological conditioning designed to push him toward the desired outcome. But that recognition didn't make the argument any less effective. He thought of the village he'd saved 3 days ago, of little Fatima's smile, of the countless other innocents who might die while he wrestled with his conscience. If I do this, he said slowly, I want guarantees, full operational autonomy, no handlers, No oversight teams, no psychological evaluations. I work alone, I choose my methods, and when I'm done, I disappear. Dr. Kellerman smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it seemed genuine. Your uncle said you'd negotiate like a professional once you accepted the reality of the situation. Very well. Complete autonomy, unlimited resources, and when your service is concluded, we'll provide you with a new identity and the means to disappear forever. Marcus looked one last time at the base where his teammates were beginning their morning routines, unaware that their medic was about to vanish into a world they couldn't imagine. He thought of Hayes, Williams, Rodriguez, and Thompson. Good. Men who believed they understood the nature of warfare and sacrifice. They had no idea that the real wars were fought by people like him, in shadows and silence, with no recognition and no remembrance. There's one more condition, Marcus said, climbing into the helicopter. When this is over, I want the truth about my father, everything, where he's buried, what his last words were, whether he knew what was coming. Dr. Kellerman settled into the seat across from him as the aircraft lifted off. That information was classified above even my clearance level, but I'll see what can be arranged. As the Afghan landscape fell away beneath them, Marcus closed his eyes and felt the last vestige of Doc Rivera disappear forever. What remained was something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. A weapon forged in deception and tempered by betrayal, ready to serve a purpose that had been written into his DNA before he'd drawn his first breath. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun, carrying him toward a destiny that had been inevitable from the moment his uncle had first placed a rifle in his 8-year-old hands. Behind them, the silence of his departure would echo through Charlie Platoon for years to come. A reminder that sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. In the distance, another village woke to a new day, its inhabitants unaware that their continued existence might soon depend on a man who no longer existed, a ghost who had traded his soul for their safety, and who would kill without hesitation to preserve an innocence he himself had never been allowed to possess. 6 months later, Marcus Rivera officially died in a helicopter crash over the Hindu Kush Mountains. The funeral was small but dignified. His SEAL teammates served as pallbearers for an empty coffin, while his mother wept tears that looked genuine, to everyone except the woman who had taught her how to cry on command 30 years earlier. But the man who had once been Marcus Rivera was very much alive, standing on a rooftop in Caracas, Venezuela, watching his target through the scope of a custom-built rifle that bore no manufacturer's markings. The man below was Dmitry Volkov, an arms dealer whose network had supplied weapons to 3 separate terrorist organizations in the past year. In 12 minutes, Volkov would step onto his private yacht for what he believed would be a romantic dinner with a young woman who had no idea her new boyfriend trafficked death for profit. The earpiece in Marcus's ear crackled to life. Ghost 7, this is Control. Target is moving to position. You are cleared for engagement. Marcus no longer responded to communications from Control. In the 6 months since his recruitment, he had completed 17 missions across 4 continents, each one more morally ambiguous than the last. What had begun as eliminating clear threats to innocent lives had gradually shifted to removing inconvenient obstacles to American interests. The latest assignment had been a journalist in Prague who had gotten too close to exposing a CIA black site operation. Ghost 7, please acknowledge, the voice repeated with an edge of irritation. Marcus adjusted his scope and settled into the shooting position that had become as natural as breathing. Through the crosshairs, he could see Volkov laughing at something on his phone, completely unaware that death was observing him from 800 meters away. But Marcus didn't squeeze the trigger. Instead, he found himself studying the man's face, looking for some sign of humanity beneath the monster. It was then that he noticed the small photograph Volkov had pulled from his wallet, a picture of 2 young children, a boy and a girl, both with their father's dark eyes and serious expressions. The arms dealer kissed the photo before tucking it back into his jacket, a gesture so tender and familiar that it shattered something inside Marcus that he thought had died months ago. "Negative, Control," Marcus whispered into his throat mic. "I have complications on target. Abort mission." The response was immediate and furious. "Ghost 7, you are not authorized to abort. Take the shot. That is a direct order." Marcus slowly lowered his rifle, his hands trembling for the first time since Afghanistan. The man in his scope was undoubtedly guilty of supplying weapons that had killed innocents, but he was also a father who carried pictures of his children and kissed them for luck. The moral calculus that had once seemed so clear, eliminate the bad to protect the good, had become an impossible equation with variables that multiplied faster than he could solve them. "Control, Ghost 7 is going dark." Marcus removed his earpiece and crushed it under his boot. The action felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying, like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was ground below or an endless fall into darkness. He packed his rifle with mechanical precision, muscle memory taking over while his mind wrestled with the implications of what he had just done. By nightfall, Marcus was on a cargo ship bound for Morocco, having traded his government, credentials and operational funding for a forged passport and the clothes on his back. The captain, a weathered Frenchman who asked no questions as long as the payment was in cash, had agreed to let him work his passage in exchange for keeping quiet about his presence on board. As the ship cut through the Mediterranean swells under a canopy of stars, Marcus found himself alone on deck, staring at the horizon and thinking about the village in Afghanistan where his transformation had begun. He wondered if little Fatima still smiled despite the war around her, if old Ahmad still shared his tea with strangers, if they knew that their continued existence had cost him everything he thought he was. The satellite phone in his jacket pocket buzzed, a number he didn't recognize, though he suspected he knew who was calling. Marcus had been off the grid for 3 days, long enough for his former handlers to realize he wasn't coming back. "Hello, Marcus." Dr. Kellerman's voice was as calm and clinical as ever, but he could hear the underlying tension. "I was wondering when you'd finally break." "I haven't broken," Marcus replied, though the words felt hollow. "I've just remembered what I used to believe in." "And what was that?" "That there's a difference between necessary killing and convenient killing. That some lines once crossed can't be uncrossed." Marcus watched the moon's reflection dance on the dark water. "That maybe my father was right to try to stop what you were creating." Dr. Kellerman's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Your father was a naive idealist who couldn't understand the realities of modern warfare. The world isn't saved by good intentions, Marcus. It's saved by people willing to make the hard choices, to sacrifice their souls so others can sleep peacefully. Then, maybe the world doesn't deserve to be saved." The silence stretched between them across continents and oceans, filled with the weight of philosophical differences that could never be reconciled. "You know we can't let you disappear," Dr. Kellerman said finally. "You know too much, you're too dangerous, and you're too valuable to simply walk away. There will be consequences." Marcus closed his eyes and felt the sea breeze on his face, tasting salt and freedom and the terrifying possibility of choosing his own path for the first time in his life. "I know. But for the first time since I was 8 years old, the consequences will be mine to face, not yours to orchestrate." He ended the call and threw the phone overboard, watching it disappear into the black water with a small splash that seemed to echo across eternity. Somewhere behind him, the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in human history was mobilizing to find him. Somewhere ahead, an uncertain future waited in the shadows of a world that suddenly seemed full of infinite, dangerous possibilities. Marcus Rivera was dead, killed in action serving his country. But the man who remained, scarred, haunted, and finally free to choose his own battles, was something new entirely. Something his creators had never intended to forge. a weapon with a conscience, a ghost with a heartbeat, and for the first time in decades, a human being with the power to decide for himself what was worth killing for and what was worth dying to protect. The ship sailed on through the darkness, carrying him toward a dawn he would have to create for himself, one choice at a time.